Well, hi everyone. I wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight. For those of you that don't know me for whatever reason, I'm Johnny Rostello. I'm the Director of College Counseling at Tarbut Torah. And tonight more or less is an opportunity for us to explain in a little bit more detail what your PSAT scores are all about, why it's relevant in the college admissions process, and ideally we'll give you a little bit more of a snippet of where things are at currently with standardized testing and college admissions in the pandemic world we live in. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our guest speaker for tonight. His name is Nick Stanley. Nick oversees, he's the president of Test Prep Gurus. And the reason I kind of outsource it to experts, just so you guys all know, is Nick has a wealth of experience and knowledge within the test prep landscape, where like he would default to me when it comes to college admissions and working with you and working with essays. And so subsequently, in a very collaborative way, I default to him when it comes to standardized testing because he truly is the expert in this field. And so the other thing that I absolutely adore about Nick is A, we are like co-chairs of the NACAT College Fair together, and then B, he's an academic at heart. He loves to learn, and you're going to see that in how he presents. It's informative and it's engaging, and hopefully it's educational. And hopefully it gives you a little bit more of a snapshot of why this information is relevant and why it matters. And he's been doing this for quite a few years with our community, so it has proved to be a very beneficial experience, which is why we continue to offer it. So without further ado, I will default to Nick, and he will kind of take you guys through the PSAT scoreback night, and then I'll be back at the end to answer general questions you guys may have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Johnny. I really appreciate the nice intro, and great to see you again. Hopefully we'll get to do it in person sometime in the near future. So for everybody out there tonight, I know the big question is, will standardized tests even matter for our current juniors and then our current sophomores and freshmen and so on and so forth? The very short answer to that is yes, but there are various levels to how that landscape is changing, and we're going to get into all of that tonight. Before we jump into that, one thing I want everybody to do to just make sure we know the interface. If you're on a phone or a laptop, sorry, a phone or a tablet, one of the key things that if you just shrink using on your iPad like this, you can shrink the talking heads so that you can see the actual presentation slides a little more clearly, and that is a helpful tip on those smaller screens. And then I would like everybody to use the chat function there, and if you would, or yeah, the chat area, and just put in the grade or grades if you have multiple kids at Tarbut of your student. I just want to make sure that people know how this function works. There's depending on your operating system, there's a question mark up in the right-hand corner, and it looks like you're asking for help. That's actually where you get to ask questions of Johnny and I. And so I just want to make sure everybody knows how to do that, and I want to know what grade everybody's in. So let's go ahead and put that out there. There we go. Vicky's on it. All right. Oh, it was actually Karen who got in there first. Okay. All right. All right, we got one 11th grader, a lot of 10th graders, parent of a 9th grader in there. All right, excellent. So we'll obviously put the real focus here on our current sophomores. I will spend a little bit of time on the juniors though, just because we want to get good information in there to the community. And this is the craziest year in the history of college admissions, I think it's fair to say. And so there's plenty to unpack. And we're going to do tonight's PSAT presentation a little bit differently. What I want to do, because everybody's, I'm speaking to a lot of high schools right now, and the questions I'm getting from people are a lot less on how do I dissect my PSAT report or a pre-ACT report. They just want to know how the scores are going to be used. And so that we're going to really look at the big picture and focus on that piece of the puzzle tonight. If anybody has a very pointed question on your PSAT score report, go ahead, throw it up in that question box. I will make sure to get to it at the end. And without further ado, let's jump into it. I want to start with this. This is a video about a technique to deal with anxiety, and I usually use this one for the students, but I think this year it's fair to say that the parents can use it as well. We're all dealing with a certain level of anxiety due to everything going on and a level of uncertainty out there, and I think this is a good tool that is easy to use, easy to put into practice. And as a side benefit, you can share this one with your sons and daughters. It helps in the varsity soccer game whenever that sports come back and all of that. And it certainly will help with any standardized tests like the SAT or the ACT.
You might want to try saying 3 little words to yourself. I am excited. In these studies, we had people say, I'm excited. And when people said that, when they reappraised their anxiety as excitement, they actually gave better public speeches, they sang better in our karaoke lounge, and they did better on math tests. It sounds too simple to be true, but what you're really doing is getting yourself out of a threat mindset, where you're focused on all the things that could go wrong, and into an opportunity mindset, where you're thinking about all the good things that could happen if you do well. They weren't actually less anxious, right? They just did better. That's right. So anxiety, the arousal stays high, and you stay in that high arousal state and just flip from negative to positive, from anxiety to excitement. The reason is anxiety and excitement have a lot more in common than you might think. They're both aroused emotions. In both, the heart beats faster, cortisol surges, and the body prepares for action. It's much easier to get from anxiety to excitement than it is from anxiety to calm. In Brooks' study, after saying, I'm excited, people sang 17% better, were 17% more persuasive at speaking, and did 22% better on a math test than people who said nothing or tried to remain calm.
Now, one of the things I want to jump in on here, I mean, this research came across my desk a number of years ago, and again, it's out of Harvard. These were, I was a little skeptical of the data at first until I really looked at the study, and the results are really astonishing here. They used SAT math sections where they saw this massive bump amongst people who were just saying, even when they weren't excited, I'm excited to take this math test. And so we've actually used this technique with our students for years and years, and have seen it be extremely effective. And I think one of the main reasons is what you see here on this graph, which is that when any person, because it's happening to us adults as well right now, but when any student experiences anxiety, it's often the people around us, their first impulse is to say what? Calm down. Calm down. Try to calm yourself down. Take a deep breath to calm yourself down. The problem is that once anxiety takes hold in the body, it is very difficult, if not impossible, for certain people to calm down at all. And trying to calm down, which results in failure, actually makes most of those people more anxious. What works instead is this movement from anxiety to excitement. And the reason that works is because physiologically, in terms of the palms sweating, the heartbeat racing, the cortisol surging, in terms of your body, anxiety and excitement are almost the same thing. It's really just a frame of mind switch. And professional athletes, if you're into biographies of athletes, they talk about doing this and flipping this switch, and they use different vocabulary, but they're talking about the exact same thing. In high pressure situations, they try to turn their anxiety from the pressure into excitement because it improves performance. And this is just a wonderful trick that I think anybody can use in any pressure-filled situation, especially a standardized test. And my last thought on this is that if you really want to turbocharge this technique for a test in school, because that's where we have used it the most and have seen a lot of success with it, is to have a student sometime in an hour before that pressure situation, take out a piece of paper and a pencil, you write freehand for 3 minutes, don't stop writing the entire time, and just jot down all the reasons that you are maybe not excited to take the test, because that is not inherently truthful. All the things that could go well as a result of doing well on the test. And as you talk about things that could go well, why you're excited about those things to happen. We have seen, I mean, students who take that technique seriously really helps with this anxiety, and more importantly, it helps with performance, which is what we really want to see. Because when anybody's taking a AP exam at school or an SAT for the College Board, we want to see them be able to showcase their potential. I mean, everybody on this call is receiving an excellent education at Tarbut, and we want people, we don't want anything holding them back. We want them to be able to show everybody what they're capable of on these exams. All right, let's dive a little bit into college admissions, because and how decisions are often made and in colleges in relationship to the quantitative metrics. And when I say quantitative metrics, that mostly boils down to GPA and your standardized test score. And what we're going to look at is how things have worked in the past, where we expect things to change and shift a bit, and then where we think it's going to go in the future. All right, so this is looking at USC. This was data taken over a multi-year period with an Orange County private school, a number of students that applied to USC. It's an unweighted GPA. Somebody always asks why the GPA is capped at 4.0, but it's capped there because the data that USC released in this case was with an unweighted GPA, and most selective schools with the click of a mouse can see your GPA through different lenses, whether that be the weighted version, the unweighted version, including freshman grades, pulling out freshman grades. They have several different ways they can look at GPAs just to get a full sense of the student's progress and trajectory over time. And then down here on this axis, we've got interchangeable scores between ACT and SAT. So a 12 is equal to a 660, and we go all the way up where a 36 would be a perfect score on the ACT, and then a 1600 would be a perfect score on the SAT. Now, if you are really savvy with the handout system here, there is a link you can click and it will automatically download this SAT versus ACT handout, which I would in past years be handing out to you in person. Since we can't do that, I am going to just pull up this real quick in case you cannot find the link. I'm just going to pull this over right here. At this address, if you need to download any of these flyers, and there are several of them, www.prepgurus.com/resources1, or you can just go to the Prep Gurus website. Resources is right up here at the top. When you scroll down, all of this stuff is free to anyone that just wants to educate themselves. There's an SAT, ACT comparison handout, puts everything, any question you have on comparing those two exams, it's right there in the handout. Finding the right fit shows typical ACT and SAT scores at the 100 most popular colleges, as well as a little bit about merit-based scholarships. And then finally down here, there is a flyer that looks at your standard timelines to prepare for the SAT and ACT. And this is a bit different for current juniors. Fortunately, we've got mostly sophomores in the audience tonight, and so this will fit just fine. And then if you scroll down, the last piece here helps you to compare SAT and ACT scores, so you can convert between the two. Because as we're going to discuss tonight, there's really no reason anymore for any student to study for both the SAT and the ACT. What you want to do is determine which score paints you in a little bit better light, and then you run with that single one exam. You choose SAT or ACT at the beginning, and then you only focus on that exam. The reason for that, colleges don't need to see both an SAT and an ACT. There is no college that has a preference for one exam over the other. They just want to see the single best score you can produce. So that's why we recommend focusing on one test, all your time and energy on that one exam. That will lead you to the best result in this process. And while I'm here, if anybody needs to take a free mock exam, you've got your PSAT. If you want to compare that to an ACT and you have missed the ACT testing that has gone on through Tarbut this year, because it's been a little different, like everything else, you can also click right here on this mock exam link. And I will put this at the end of the presentation as well and email this to everyone afterwards, just so you know where to go. But if you click right there on take the next step, just put in the message box you would like a free ACT exam. You are make sure to mention you're a Tarbut family, because there won't be any costs for any of this for any Tarbut families out there. And someone will email you a link to a ACT exam that you can take at home, but it is a full-length test. It's just like the real thing, and they'll guide you through that process. You can do that with a proctor, or you can do it on your own time. And then it's a real critical piece to help you to compare your SAT and ACT scores. All right, there is a question here. What's the difference between the PSAT and the ACT? And before I run back to the college admissions slide here, I will tackle that question real fast. The difference with that report, the report you've got there for the PSAT, is that the PSAT is just a shortened version of the SAT. And so it gives you a fairly accurate, it is not perfect, but a fairly accurate range for where you would be scoring if your student was to take a full-length SAT today. And the reason it's not 100% accurate is it's about half as long in length. And so it's difficult to capture the entire exam that way. The one other strange thing is that they cap the total score on the PSAT. It's at a 1570, I think just to confuse people. They lowered the ceiling a little bit because the highest level difficulties on questions on the actual SAT do not show up on the PSAT. So they said, even if you got everything right, you wouldn't reach quite up to a 1600. It's a silly thing they did. Don't spend too much time worrying about it. Whatever score you got, that is a very strong indicator of where you would score on an SAT or your student to take it today. All right, is SAT harder than the PSAT? A little bit. Mostly though, just only because it's longer, and that fatigue that sets in over testing for 3.5 hours is a very real factor. I mean, that's one of the things that prepping for these exams provides training just for that endurance to last that long. All right, let's get back to our slides here. So this is how I want to look at how traditionally a school like USC would be interpreting SAT and ACT scores. Then we'll get into some of the more subtle stuff, where what's going on with the UCs, what will happen for our 10th graders, and so on. So this is how this traditionally works. And by the way, Mr. Rostello and I were talking before this call started. Both of us do expect by the time all of our current 10th graders have rolled all the way around to next spring, we expect things to be more or less back to the old school model. There will be some modifications, but the reason I want to spend time on how things were before the pandemic is because for you 10th graders, it's very likely that it will be very similar by the you are applying to college to how it was pre-pandemic. Okay, the red dots were denied admission to USC. The green dots were accepted at USC, but they decided to go to USC. And then our blue dots were accepted at USC, but they matriculated to a different college. And at any school, at any college, there's going to be what we would call the competitive range, or about half students that fall in that range where GPA and your standardized test score meet. It's going to be about a 50-50. That means you're falling right in that competitive range. That's a good target school for you. It's going to come down to all the qualitative factors after that, right? Your standardized test score and your GPA puts you right in the mix with a lot of other students. And then a lot of it's going to come down to your personal statement and supplemental essays and recommendation letters and the story that your transcript tells over time. Does the major you list on your application line up with where you have succeeded in school? Have you sought out tougher classes that line up with that major? I mean, colleges, there used to be, there was a time a few years ago, and that's why this myth persists, that colleges wanted to see students who were everything to everyone. They took every AP class under the sun. They succeeded in every class. You just needed to take more difficult classes and do better in those difficult classes. Things have shifted in the last 5 years where colleges are much more interested in areas of strength, right? So you don't have to be as well-rounded so long as you show strong areas of strength and deep interest in those areas. For instance, if you were going to be a journalism major, you would want to, you can think what classes you would want to see a student that would do well in, right? I mean, any of our humanities classes. And then we would hope that those students sought out the higher difficulty classes in the humanities. We might not care quite as much about whether they took AP Bio or college prep bio. What we would really care about is, did they go after AP Humanities classes where they were really challenging themselves to write a lot and write well? Okay, so that's our middle zone, right? And then we've got students that would be behind the competitive range. And so that's what people are talking about when they say there's a reach school, right? So if your grades and your scores are behind the normal competitive range for USC, and mind you, this competitive range would be a little bit different at any given college, right? It's a moving target depending on which college you are applying to. And the beauty of that is that every student can have a balanced list where they apply to an equal number of schools that are right in the target range, then some that are safeties, and then some that are reach schools. Okay, so let's go. When we're looking at a reach, we don't want to get married to these schools. We don't want to get our heart set on going to them because the percentages are a bit lower, right? It does not mean it's impossible though. I mean, you can see yourself there. Are there green dots on this graph here that are below the competitive range? Sure there are. And at USC, it's usually in a big group setting, fun to see what people guess on how those students got in. The number one answer is always athletics, and it is correct. USC and a number of private schools, including many of the Ivy League colleges, really do prioritize athletes, and that as a private university, they can set those priorities however they want. And so that's one area that schools like this would make an exception for. Last year in person, I believe somebody said students who make up fake sport profiles and give a donation to the coach, which was funny. It made people laugh. Don't do that. Don't do that. That is definitely, we have learned that's a very bad idea. But they do what is acceptable is families that have a history of giving at their high school and then are potential donors to the college at large rather than making tricky secret donations, to doing that through the proper channels. And the reason colleges do that is because when someone comes along and donates a building to USC, that probably pays for 20, 30, even 40 students to attend that, to make that university affordable, right? Whether that's a full scholarship to just that little bit extra that somebody needs to just get over the financial hump. And so I actually think by and large, in spite of the admissions scandal, which made a lot of headlines, but in real terms was a small percentage, a tiny fraction of actual college applicants. Most people want to do this the honest way. Colleges want to do this the honest way, and they're trying to help as many kids as they can. And that's why they make allowances for people who are development cases, which is college admission speak for might donate a building someday. And then there's certainly certain talents. I mean, if you are a nationally ranked musician or artist, I mean, and somebody who really stands out, not just really good in your 11th grade art class at your particular high school, but you really stand out on a much larger scale and are doing something unique and different, that can make a difference for certain majors out here. And those are all, if you have questions about that, go to Mr. Rostello with those, because he can help guide you through that process. All right, we covered the target range. And then the last zone we need to talk about is when you're above the target range. And this is obviously a really nice place to be. And that's why everyone should have that balanced list where you're applying to a proper number of schools that balance your list, where you're very likely to get into those schools. And I do like the idea of getting excited about your likely schools. I was just going to say visit them, and caught myself. Check out online your likely schools. Win things. You're all 10th graders. There's going to be plenty of time to visit these schools as we get into the spring and put COVID-19 in the rearview mirror, which I personally cannot wait to do, as I'm sure pretty much everybody on this call feels the same way. Visit those schools, learn about them. Just because they're a little bit lower on the rankings than some of their schools you're applying to doesn't mean they aren't the perfect fit for you. Give them a chance. Those rankings are a very, very imperfect science, if we can really call them a science at all. And so give those schools a chance. If for no other reason, then you are much more likely to receive large amounts of financial aid at schools where you're above the target range. You've got need-based merit, which everyone's going to qualify based on their financial profile, but you also have merit-based financial aid. And merit-based financial aid need is taken completely out of the equation. It's mostly based on traditionally standardized test scores and GPA. And who doesn't like free money for college? I mean, at a school like USC, the trustee scholarship is free tuition for 4 years. And if you've looked at the prices at USC recently, you know that's worth a bloody fortune. Okay, and then last thought on this slide, because I think a lot of the time we hear about standardized test scores, I mean, especially from students. I mean, they feel the pressure and they feel judged by these tests. And what they're worried is that they're going to lose something by doing poorly on that SAT or ACT exam, right? I'm going to blow it on that test and then lose options for college. The reverse is actually true. If you attend a school like Tarbut, that's the number one thing to put a student on good footing with any competitive college out there, right? Is to attend a rigorous high school that provides a good education. And selective colleges do know what schools, at least in the United States, their level of rigor. They do track these things. So Tarbut is the fact that you're a student attended Tarbut is going to help them in the process. Sorry, my throat is dry with the wind out here lately. Okay, where was I? So that part's going to help. And of the 2,000 plus 4-year accredited colleges across America, the vast majority of them would love to have a student from Tarbut. All a standardized test score is going to do is provide more opportunities, not fewer, but more opportunities because if you do well on those standardized exams in relation to their typical applicant, you will boost your place, boost your profile in the eyes of that school. And so I really like this idea that students should stop thinking of these tests as assessments and try to think of them as opportunities. A couple of reasons for that. One, it's good for their mental health, and especially these days, anything we can do for students' mental health, we should be all over it. But two, they perform better. Again, it's just like that and the anxiety technique trick there, where when you change your frame of mind as you approach these tests, you can actually improve performance. And who doesn't like a win-win like that? And this student right here, and I think this really illustrates this example with data. This is the same student with 3 different test scores, right? The GPA is the same in all 3 instances. So this is a student, this was the starting score, did some prep work, did better on the exam, got to where they were right in the target range, did even better still, and ended up in a place where they were eligible to earn merit-based scholarship aid. And that's the way we want to approach this process. Not that we're going to lose something, but there's everything to gain. Now, this brings us to oh, interesting. So somebody was just saying, will you please, they wanted something repeated. I don't know exactly what that something is, but I am recording this tonight. And so when this ends, I will send a link to everybody on the presentation, and it will have, it's recorded locally, so it'll have strong video, audio. If you miss anything, you'll be able to catch it then. And then within a couple of days after the presentation, we'll make sure somebody goes through and puts links into each and every topic we discussed tonight and the time that it's at. So if you need to skip around in the video, you can do so. So many cool things we can do with technology today. Will GPA replace SAT and ACT? This is the number one question I'm getting right now from both people on the counseling side and the parent side, because the UCs are test blind this round. And before I go any further, I should make sure we always want to make sure we're using the same vocabulary. Test blind means that a university will not even look at an SAT or an ACT score if it is submitted. That's test blind. There is also test optional, which means you're not required to send one. You can if you think it will help your standing with that school, and the colleges will take that test score into consideration. The majority of colleges this current round are test optional, but some of them are test blind. And there's a lot of news right now surrounding the UCs and the Cal State system, and a lot of confusion as well. And that is not on the part of the people. I put that squarely on the shoulders of the UC system for rolling out a fairly ridiculous policy that changes each year over a multi-year period. Their intention was to be test optional this year. There is a lawsuit pending, but it was adjudicated in such a manner that until the lawsuit is resolved, they need to stay test blind for this current admissions cycle. And it had to do, I'm not going to get into all the details, but it had to do with students with disabilities and their access to SAT and ACT testing during the pandemic. And so as a result of this lawsuit, the UC system is currently test blind this year. Next year, and so that would apply to our current juniors, the UC system will be test optional if the lawsuit has been resolved by them. It is possible that the lawsuit would continue to be ongoing or resolved in a negative way for the UC system, and they would continue to be forced to be test blind. And after that, the UC system plans to go to a test blind option for California students only. which again is very confusing to a lot of people. They also plan to create their own test that they will use in place of SAT and ACT on that round. And so that would apply to our current sophomores. Will they be able to create a new test that quickly? Personally, I do not believe they will be able to. But we have to wait and see what happens. And so in regards, so here's my advice to current sophomores, and we'll get to your PSAT score in a second, which is that if we move to a two-tiered system here, let's say the UCs completely throw out standardized testing, we would really move to two systems. One would be Cal State and University of California. Possibly some other public universities would follow suit. And this is if they're unable to create their own tests and they move forward with the test blind thing. They would certainly place a lot more emphasis on GPA. And what I anticipate, what many of the brightest folks and people with a track record of anticipating trends in the college admission space have all said is that they also anticipate AP scores might scoot into that space where SAT and ACT scores used to reside. Again, this is speculative, but that is my best guess and my colleagues' best guess at this time. So one thing I would encourage our current sophomores to do, if you're taking an AP class this year, do well on those exams at the end of the year. As you roll into junior year, many students will be taking one or many AP classes. Do well on those tests. And if anybody ever needs help with those, just make sure to sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter at the end of this, because we will send, we'll do webinars just like this to give tips on how to perform better on your AP exams. But we'll do that when we're closer to AP testing. And we try to churn out as much free content that as many kids as possible can use, and AP exams is right in our wheelhouse. It's one of the things we help a lot of families with, so we'll be putting that out there in the near future too. That would bring us to system 2. So this is what I mean, where things would get complicated for you guys. But most private colleges would go back to the old system in which GPA and standardized test scores determine the foot in the door, as we saw on that graph, and then all your qualitative pieces, all those things that make you, where you can really describe your point of view in the world and how you're going to fit at a particular college and add something to their environment. That's what will separate you from the pack. AP scores will still matter, but of lesser importance than your GPA or your standardized test score. And then I believe you'd have more changes, and you have a lot more colleges going test optional rather than making it required, which I believe is a good thing. At most schools that are test optional, a large majority of students that apply successfully to the college still submit SAT and ACT scores. However, not every student is able to showcase their potential on an exam, and there are a number of populations that don't have access to the same schools and resources we have in a community like Orange County. Those students tend to benefit quite a bit from the test optional policies, and that is the lay of the land with test optional and test blind. I'm sure some of you are confused by that, even though I tried to explain it as simply and as clearly as I can. There will be a blog post on this in the very near future that I will make sure to send out to everybody, where it's in writing and you can break it down, analyze it, email me questions and all that good stuff. Okay, let's get to that. Oh yes, and then at Tarbut, the plan coming up here is that there will be a March 3rd SAT and then a March 16th ACT. Now, this is a great thing that the testing agencies have rolled out. It's called district testing, where a school can hold it on their campus and stay bubbled, stay within their COVID protocols. They're not required, and this is, in the past, high schools have always been required to allow anybody who signs up for the test, no matter where they come from, to sit for that exam. And so what is being introduced this spring for the first time, many people like myself have been clamoring for this for years. was to allow schools to hold a test that would only have their students there. We now have a great reason to make this happen with COVID, because that is the safest thing to do for any of our any community, really, right? To stay bubbled and within their protocols. I actually think it's going to aid in performance as well, because it's just going to add to the comfort level. And we have seen so clearly that the kids put so much pressure on themselves with these tests that anything we can do to just make them a little bit more comfortable, take that edge off, so that they're still focused, right? We don't want to get too relaxed. They're still focused, but they're not pushing themselves. They're not so focused that they're going too far where it hampers performance. So I think this will actually help, and I'm very excited that Tarbut is taking part in this. And so those are the dates. Those are the tentative dates. As soon as they're 100% finalized, they will be shared with you by the counseling office, but you guys get the inside scoop tonight. Okay. We talked about this. We'll take a second to touch on this. How are we doing on time here? Okay, we're looking great. So I like to dispel myths when it comes to SAT and ACT, and another one, another piece of data here that I think can bring home this point that these tests are really opportunities is what we're looking at now. Because if a lot of students that, and this is really, it's a myth left over from a decade ago and the decade before that, where the people that made these tests really put out this idea that it was impossible to prepare yourself for these tests. And that was actually how I fell into this, coincidentally, into this line of work. I was in graduate school. There was a professor that wanted to show that that was not true, that you could absolutely prepare for these exams. And so he sponsored a study where we as grad students were actually paid to study for we were on the SAT back then, study for the SAT to see how high we could push our scores from our starting point. I ended up with I got really into it though. I should, that is a caveat to that. I mean, way more so than the other participants in the study. It even got to the point where I thought, man, I'm gonna figure this test out. I was studying for it even during hours when I wasn't being paid. And I did end up with a perfect score at the end of that process, and inadvertently invented a system on how to prepare for the SAT. And that's how Test Prep Gurus was very accidentally founded. I mean, even after that, I wasn't really trying to start a company or anything. It was just people in the community heard about the score. They asked me to work with their kids. One thing led to another, and fast forward 15 years later, we've got Test Prep Gurus is what it is today. We work with students certainly in Orange County, and that's always been our home base, but actually with students all over the world through distance learning software. I mean, I think we counted a dozen different countries that we worked with students in the last couple of years. And so you never know where life's going to take you, students. So just keep your head on a swivel and be open to opportunities. All right, and speaking of one, because I like this. In 2001, we had 89 perfect scores on the ACT. 89 right here, right? So this data covers a 15-year period from 2001 to 2016. And the number of test takers doubled during that 15-year period. So we would expect to see double 89 perfect scores. It's going to be roughly 178. Instead, we see 2,235 perfect scores. Still a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent of all the students who take the ACT every year. But what I see right here in this trend is right around the turn of the decade here, the message people like me were putting out there was that it's absolutely possible to prepare for these tests. Your destiny is in your hands. And I think that's a much stronger message than, oh, some kids just happen to be naturally good at this and some aren't, and you're stuck with the results. That part of it always felt very unfair to me. Whereas now I believe this is a system that rewards hard work and it rewards merit. I still don't think the SAT and the ACT tell us a lot of value about a student. I don't think they tell us about a student's potential or their intelligence. All it is a measuring stick. Everybody's doing the same thing because we all know high schools are different, right? I mean, we all know one teacher at a high school is easier than another for the same subject. We all know some high schools give out more A's than other high schools. That's why it helps college admissions officers to have one test where everybody does the same thing. And what I see right here is that the evolution of that has led to now students go, oh, if I want to work hard at this, if I have a goal for the future to get into a certain school or a certain range of schools, that I can go do that if I put in the blood, sweat, and tears into this. And I think that's a good message for our students. Okay, so what do I do next? And this is where we'll touch on your PSAT briefly. I'm going to go grade by grade. We're going to skip the 12th graders. The only thing I have to say is for everybody else, just say, oh, thank goodness my kid is not a 12th grader. They had a really rough go of it this year. Okay, oh, whoops, for my 9th graders. And I saw a few of you were parents of 9th graders. All I want you to do is encourage those students, however you need to do it, to read for pleasure. I don't care what they read for pleasure. Really could be anything, just something outside of what they read in school. And I mean anything. If they want to read US Weekly, I'm not a big fan of the magazine, but if that's what gets them to open up words on a page and read, fine, whatever it takes, just be reading something outside of what you have to do for school. If it happens to be books, even better. I really don't want any students doing any sort of preparation for the SAT or the ACT during 9th grade. I think while you may see a little bump in their scores, they're not going to take official tests. So there's no end result that's helpful. What it does lead towards is burnout because they're so young and they're just getting used to high school. So I say, unless your counselor says you are the exception to the rule, you don't even worry about SAT and ACT when you're in the 9th grade. Read for pleasure. It'll help you in school. It's good for your brain. And just as a byproduct down the line, when you reach 10th grade, 11th grade, and you're talking to someone like me, and it's like, hey, we're going to figure out how to do better on these critical reading sections. And this is just another insider tip here. The math sections on SAT and ACT, the grammar-based sections on SAT and ACT, they're highly teachable, right? If we sit down, spend the time, put in the energy, students can learn that material and really get after it that way. There's a science section only on the ACT. It's very foreign to most students, but again, extremely teachable with someone who knows that material inside and out, because really it's more about decoding graphs and visual charts rather than it's not really about biology, chemistry, and actual science. It's about decoding visual information. If you sit down with somebody who knows that material, they can teach that to a student and they're going to perform very well in that section. But the critical reading sections on the SAT and the ACT, those are the hardest ones to improve your scores on. And we did a huge data dive we really looked at students over a 6-year period that we had seen be successful on the SAT and the ACT. We emailed as many of them, we emailed all of them, got responses, fortunately, from a large percentage of them to just have them fill out a questionnaire on things that they did. And then we ran regression analysis to see which variables popped out. Reading for pleasure was far and away the killer variable, the killer bullet for improving on the critical reading section, which is the toughest one to raise your score on. So tip for the future. All right, and 10th graders, it's not too late. Just start reading for pleasure now. Okay, for my 10th graders, which is where we're at. Now we covered this. Every college accepts SAT or ACT. No college requires both. So we want to figure out which one you're a little bit better at. What you need to do that. Step one, you're going to take step 1 and 2 are to take a PSAT, which most of you have. If you don't, again, reach out to us. We will send you a free essay. We'll actually send you a full-length SAT just to be extra accurate to see where you're scoring at now. And then we ran a mock ACT at Tarbut this year, but anybody who missed that or didn't hear about it or whatever, can sign up again through a link. I will show that link at the end and I'll email it to everybody on this presentation. Then you're going to compare those two scores, right? Because the goal here is to decide between SAT and ACT. This is just a visual representation of how we translate these scores. One of our people, if you call in, certainly Mr. Rostello could do it, but if you want to talk to one of our people as well, one of our directors, they'll be happy to take 10 minutes to help you decide between SAT and ACT. Just let them know you're a Tarbut family. And the reason it's good to just have somebody, rather than to just use the charts by themselves, is that there is a little bit of nuance to this, depending on the time of year you took the test. Is it a PSAT or a full-length SAT? There's just a few variables to it. And just to make sure you get it right, it is helpful to just chat with a professional briefly about that. We compare the scores we choose. Then we move into our plan on how to tackle it from there. And again, you know, I am just going to pull up that link while I'm talking about it, because the last thing I want to do is forget. So again, and I will email this to everyone, but right here, there's the full address, www.prepgurus.com/contact. And come right down here, take the next step. This thing's going to pop up. Fill this guy out, put in Tarbut, and the rest of it, and just mention down here that you, whatever free exam you would like, and we will make that happen for you. Okay. All right, so the next step in the process, and oh, and I'm sorry, and I would like everybody, all my 10th graders, I would like you to, taking the mock ACT close in proximity to your PSAT is a good idea. So I would say if you have the spare time, or if there's going to be some spare time over the winter break, go ahead and reach out to us to take that mock ACT if you haven't already done so, because getting that decision made will be really helpful. You don't need to start prepping at that time, but that's when it would be helpful to get those scores, just start to get a plan in place. Most students begin that prep process as 10th grade ends and they roll into the summer between 10th and 11th grade. Yeah, there we go. Now, as you move into 11th grade, so this still involves all of you. The choices you want to make here, you decide between the tests. Will scores help your applications? For the majority of students, they will be applying somewhere, even if they're at some test optional schools and a few UC schools if they're still test blind for our current sophomores. You're still probably going to be applying to some private schools that will still require an SAT or an ACT. Or you might as well do well enough for any test optional school, so that's a boost for your application rather than a hindrance. And you want to pick a test date. The planning for each student is going to be different, right? Depending on your certain goals. I am going to send you, and I will email this flyer to you. This is where you would go to this one right here, which was our planning flyer. And this, I think, really breaks it down. I'm not going to go through every iteration on here, but if you take a look at this, it will spend a little time on it, whether you're on the standard path or the accelerated path. And the accelerated path is fairly common for our Newport Beach private school students. By and large, you're accelerated kids, so it makes sense. But we'll figure out which one is right for you and then get you on that track. Okay, and then the last step you want to take is how you want to prepare for these tests. And I like to say that they come in 3 different flavors. Ice cream's a nice visual of that. You've got your self-prep, you've got working in a classroom, and then you've got your one-on-one prep. All of these can work. There is a way to make all of these work. If you're gonna go the self-prep route, use the free resources that exist online. The Khan Academy has a lot of them for the SAT. There are free resources as well for the ACT. They're not quite as strong, but I really recommend this to students who are extremely strong self-starters and who are willing to put a lot of extra time into this process, because you're not going to have the shortcuts of talking to somebody who can figure out quickly what parts of the test you can skip, what do you need to study for, what don't you need to study for. So just, you need to have a lot of motivation and be able to, that needs to come from inside for the self prep to work. But if you've got that can absolutely work. The classroom prep, whether that's, I imagine for you guys at some point in the future would be in-person classes that might range from 10 students to 20 students, could be an online class. The classroom prep programs are not nearly as effective as one-on-one, and you can imagine why, right? I mean, one-on-one, that teacher is, they're an expert on these exams. They're solely focused on what you need to do to succeed, and they can spend time, all their energy is focused on you during the session. They're also able to spend a lot of time on that student, thinking about them, figuring out what makes them tick, assigning them targeted extra work when they're not in session with that student. And so that's why the one-on-one is so effective. Classroom stuff is not nearly as effective. And I want to make sure to just not, I don't want to overpromise anything with the classroom, but we do offer classroom programs. We will be rolling out some online this year, just to offer a lower price point for families that are looking for that, because we can do some good with an online class, but it is not a substitute for one-on-one, which is, all the data just shows that's where the action is at. If you really need to improve your score in a large way, one-on-one is where you want to go. And small groups can work as well in a 3-on-1 setting, 4-on-1 setting. It can, and some students like it because they can go with their friends. But it's a dual-edged sword. Like, for a lot of kids, going with your friends doesn't always lead to excellent performance. And so if you have the motivation and the means, one-on-one is really the best way to do it. And then classroom, I think, is a good fallback if we need a lower cost option, and then the self prep for our self-motivated go-getters. Okay, we have a new step 5. Make sure to get 4 and 5s on your AP exams, because they may have outsized importance for those UC schools, as we mentioned earlier. All right, we're coming down the home stretch. Feel free to put in any questions if you want into that question box, and I'll just see if there are any killer questions on anything we missed. I'll get to those. And then the last thought I wanted to leave you with, what's a good SAT or ACT score? I really think it's important that we push this message. There are no good or bad scores. There are only scores that are going to help you reach your goals. That's all these tests are. That's all they're good for. A perfect score on the ACT will not get you a free cup of coffee at Starbucks. All these test scores are good for is helping you to get into schools that are your goals for the future. And then final, here's the link. I will email that to you guys. We'll put you on the free bi-monthly newsletter on college admissions, because there are going to be a lot of updates, especially for your class. We've talked about a few speculative issues. We'll make sure you have the right info at the right time. And then, of course, if you need mock testing for free for the SAT, ACT, AP exams would also apply to this group. And of course, if you need help figuring out a plan, how to prep for SAT, ACT, or AP exams, we're always here to help. And I tell you what, I'm gonna look in the question box to see if there's any just killer questions in there. I'll throw it over to Johnny for a second, see if there's anything you wanna wrap us up with, and go from there.
No, you've done a good job. I mean, so overwhelmingly, the Pulse is the sophomore grade. So you guys had access to the PSAT in October. We administered the mock ACT in November. If you were unable, for whatever reason, to take the mock ACT, it would make sense to sign up for a free test to then figure out what the plan is. And I think that that's really where you should be in this process. And then obviously the plan, depending on where you're at math-wise, depending on kind of where you're at with reading and whatnot, the plan could potentially mean starting test prep over the summer between sophomore year and junior year, which is normal. which is like the standard practice. So, and to Nick's point, standardized admissions, most schools are planning to go back to standardized admissions in some way, shape, or form. They're not planning to continue to be test blind, hypothetically, or most will, like what he was saying, will move to that test optional format. And so I think what we're all trying to have you see is there's value added if you do well on the exam. The value added is you'll write an essay, already you'll have activities and opportunities with involvements at TBT. And then on top of it, if you have a test score that equally supports what the value added is from the transcript and from the activities and from the essay, it's just a good thing to have that helps. So don't think it's a necessity, but in the same sense, it can help, and we would still encourage you to move in that direction. And then, as needed, once we have official scores, we can reevaluate what the plan is if the scores are not what they need to be for your target schools. So, and then Nick, do we have any questions in general?
There was one question here. Monica asked a very strong question, which was, if the SAT and ACT score are roughly the same, which test should you go with? ACT is your default answer there, simply because there's less material to study on the ACT, and what that results in is that it requires less time and energy to boost that score. You can boost your score on both exams. It's just if there's less material to study on one, and you can get there faster, I say go with that one, which would be ACT. And other than that, there are a couple others in there, but I can email stuff to people specifically on that. I think that just about wraps it up for tonight. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you everyone for staying on. And you know, I know we moved this last minute, so I do apologize for the last minute notification of that. But I do wish you a very early start. Happy Hanukkah, and I hope, even though it will be smaller and probably a more of a nuclear family experience, I still hope it is a wonderful experience for you all. And students, good luck on finals if I don't see you in person the next couple days before we start finals next week. But really appreciate your time tonight. Yes. So thank you, Nick.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Nick. So.
Yes, happy Hanukkah, happy holidays to everyone, and stay safe and good night.
Take care.